Recording in progress. Hello, everybody. Welcome you to this first panel session that we are having in the second panel on policy innovation. Really great to have you all here and yeah, to spend the week with you discussing very interesting energy efficiency policy innovations and new concepts that we have that were contributed here in papers and extended abstracts. I think we have a great selection of papers and interesting concepts to discuss throughout the 5 days with you. And we are starting today with 4 presentations in this first session. We have with us Hans Nielsen, who will talk a bit about what we have learned and what we have missed. And I think it's a great start to yeah, for the panel and for the week to see what we have discussed on eceee so far and how on the point that is and what we have still to learn. We have then in today's session Anders Hansen, who is talking about flexible tariffs and how flexible tariffs were entered in Denmark and what needs to be done, or what other countries can also learn from that. We have Franz Libertson with us, who will talk about data infrastructure, data centers, and a rather new concept of energy gentrification. So very much looking forward to this discussion of the new concept. And then the last presentation will be by Nelson, a few from within for the local perspective. We have about 15 minutes. 3 of the presentations are recorded, and then after each of the 15 or after each of the presentations, you will have the chance to ask questions, or even during the presentations in the Q&A that you may be already familiar with from the plenary. And please also, if there are too many questions, or there can't be too many questions in the chat, because even if we have not the time to pick it up during the panel, the panelists can come back to you and answer the question, or yeah, to steer a discussion with these questions that we have. So please feel free during the presentations to post your questions. And we have, after each presentation, a 5-minute Q&A, and then in the end also a 10-minute Q&A for all the presentations combined. And with that, I will already not hand over to the first presenter, but we will see the first recording, which is from Hans Nielsen, and what have we learned and what have we missed at eceee so far. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear eceeers. I'm trying to see what we have learned and what we have missed in the eceee summer studies, and search for the future in the times that have passed. I've done so by looking through the panel 1 and panel 2. Panel 1, the foundations of a future energy policy, and has now been renamed to panel 2, policy innovations to ensure scale and sustain action. Which have been the challenges that the papers to these panels have addressed, and who are the receivers? There have been 182 papers presented during 7 summer studies, 14 years in these 2 panels. And I've also tried to compare a bit with the messages from eceee and from IEA and the European Union. And as you can see in this graph, the papers have raised slowly over the years, the trend at least. But what is energy efficiency really? And from my own experience, I've noticed one a bit surprising to me. I studied energy efficiency opportunities in a small country, and when I presented it to the government official, and Secretary of State stopped me after a while and said, "Mr. Nielsen, you don't understand this. we need more energy, not less. And his perception of energy efficiency was more energy. And we also see this in more recent politician, Donald Trump, who had a very strange perception of energy efficiency. It was just bad equipment. And for us, to make it simple, we say make more with less. That has been the message from ECEE and the IEA. But we should also be careful. There could be a snag. The saving equipment could be produced from far away and need transportation over long distances, needing more energy. So we should be a bit careful what we are wishing for. In the papers, the 182 papers, I have identified 4 different challenges for efficiency. The first one is to recognize the superior characteristics of energy efficiency equipment and systems and underline it and show exactly what these characteristics are and how they work and how they could be accounted for. The second challenge has been to understand the opportunity to combine energy efficiency and renewable supply for a better result, to get a bigger bang for the buck. The third is to understand how decisions are made in a political context and how energy efficiency could be used better on the market, but also to apply a different perspective of energy efficiency economics, for instance, by applying behavioral economics. And finally, the fourth is to use a different perspective on market aims. For instance, sufficiency instead of efficiency, or sufficiency as a special way of using efficiency. The first 2 I have called the technology aspects on energy efficiency, and the second 2 the conceptual aspects. And if we look through the presentations made, we have seen that over the years the technology aspects have risen a bit, and the conceptual aspect have been lowered a bit. The audiences addressed by these papers have been the politicians. We have a political case that we assume that people are prepared for change, but politicians are not. The social case, how energy efficiency could compare to energy sufficiency, the theory and practice of making a change. And finally, the business case, how can we use the markets as an instrument? The social case we have been dealing with quite a lot by discussing rebound, but also recognize that rebound is just another word for multiple benefits. The business case we have been dealing with by looking at innovations and how technology procurement can foster innovations and be shown in learning curves. But do the audiences care about what we are talking about? If we look at how the IEA have been more or less hammering the politicians over the years with the IEA market reports, every energy efficiency market reports since 2013, they started off a little bit shy, but just saying efficiency is the first fuel. The next report, they said that efficiency is an invisible powerhouse, a little bit stronger. 2015, they said that efficiency is a hidden jewel. I like that. It's quite poetic. Next year, they said that efficiency is the one resource we all possess in abundance. And then they also explained which are the multiple benefits of efficiency. And they hammered on and hammered on and hammered on. But as we all know, especially the IEA has shown it in figures that the result is quite depressing, actually. The politicians don't seem to care very much about the message. And that in spite of that the IEA in the World Energy Outlook 2014 showed that the efficiency potential is untapped and will remain untapped till 2035. Only 2/3 of the efficiency potential will be used till 2035. And this year, only a few weeks ago, the IEA presented the study of net zero climate impact. And as you can see, and you may see it if you download that report, you see that they show how the impact is visible in all sectors. The EU has tried, and they tried in 2015 by stating that it's necessary to fundamentally rethink energy efficiency and treat it as an energy source in its own right. And that sounds quite important and gives hope that the European Union should help us with that rethinking. But since this first report, 2015, there have been silence from the European Union. And rethinking takes time, and rethinking is hard. We all know that. They certainly need some sort of assistance. And for us, we have promised our participants in summer studies and readers of reports that we should provide evidence-based knowledge and analysis. And the question is evidence-based enough? Energy efficiency is not difficult, it's only complicated. And that is because very often we notice that people just want to change one piece of equipment somewhere, a lamp or a motor, but they need to do much more and replace and change the entire system. The audiences are complex themselves. They are big and requires deep insights in psychology to get an impact. So facts and evidence might not be enough to turn the tide. We may have to think more about how we are telling the story and telling the right story, and put more thought and work into telling the stories in a good way to get the narrative right. We could take some impression from even poetry. In the Swedish poetry, there is a poet who many years ago talked about his hero and said that this hero, he could talk to peasants in their own language, but also talk with learned men using Latin. And that might be something for us to think about. Maybe we are talking too much Latin between ourselves, and we are not spending enough time talking to the peasants in their language. We could take some impression from Greta Thunberg. She used the expression in the UN Assembly that you have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. How dare you? And that's strong language. We may have to think about that. Or we could take impression from the films and Robert De Niro when he was preparing for an confrontation that he expected to have with a bandit of some sort. And he said, "Are you talking to me? You're talking to me. Are you talking to me? Who the F do you think you're talking to?" And he was rehearsing. Maybe that is what we should do also, rehearsing to meet the bandits. My conclusion of all this is that we have managed well in providing insights, but less so in providing the narratives. The narratives that the audience are thirsting for so that they can understand it, the peasants they are, and tell others about. So we should focus a little bit more, not only about the evidence and the facts, but the narratives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans, for this recording. It was pre-recorded, but I think it went quite smoothly, and we didn't really see the difference here. Hans, are you with us? Could we ask you some questions? We cannot yet hear you. You're still muted. Hans, you're still muted. Yes. Okay. So of course, you are very welcome to ask questions in the Q&A on the Wova board. We have no questions there yet, if I'm correct. But please feel free to ask questions now, or also, as I said, later. Then Hans will be probably more than happy to answer the questions also after this session. So we have or I have one question myself. You have very interestingly shown that we have to work on our narrative and given some suggestions on how this narrative could look like. We are also in terms of the papers you reviewed in your paper, there was a lot of detailed expertise, but maybe like what would you recommend researchers to go into the narrative and tell the story? Is there any, you have given the example of Greta. How can we close the gap between the knowledge and the narratives, and whom should we address with this narratives? Do you have some insights on that? Some ideas? You're muted again. I don't know whether you did this yourself or someone else is keeping on to muting you. Maybe you can unmute yourself again, please.
All right, now I think I pushed the right button. Well, I'm not quite sure, as I said in the end, that we may be talking too much Latin between ourselves, because we at the eceee meetings, we know each other, we know what we are talking about, but we do not think very much about how we should change this talk and direct it to other people, to the people. I started off with giving the example of when I met Secretary of State in a small country, and he stopped me after a while and said that, "Mr. Nielsen, you don't understand. We need more energy, not less." And his impression of energy efficiency and what I was talking about was less energy. And that was a sort of insult to him. And I think that we do not think very much about how people are receiving our message and what their perception is. Like, for instance, and I also mentioned Donald Trump, that he had this impression of that energy efficiency equipment was just inferior. It was something that we should not use because that was making life worse. And that might be something that we should put more thinking into. How do people receive our message? What is their mindset? And their mindset in many cases is not the same as ours. It's totally different. Do we really think about that? And that is also why I mentioned Greta Thunberg, because she was bold enough to address United Nations, but saying, "How dare you?" And that boldness might be something that we should think about and try to make use of.
Thank you, Hans. We had one more question in the chat that was on the case of COVID, and we had the bit earlier also from the Coalition for Energy Saving already pointing out that energy efficiency could be such a good solution for all the challenges we are tackling right now after COVID. And the question here from Jackie Pat was whether, whether it makes the case for energy efficient, whether you think it makes the case for energy efficiency and selling energy efficiency easier now with COVID, particular maybe having in mind this four advantages that we saw earlier in the plenary on, that it has comfort benefits and all these.
It could be a chance, because a lot of people have by living through the COVID era, they have understood that they have to think differently, and that might be a chance for us as well. If we could, and I've thought a little bit about it myself when I've looked at the US president when he used the expression "build back better." And I think that a lot of people receive his message, but say they hear "build back." They don't hear the better in the end. So that could be a chance for us to take up this challenge and explain that better also means more energy efficient, different, and so on. But I'm afraid that a lot of people in the world only hear "build back" because they are longing for the life they had before COVID. So if we could come up with a way of explaining what build back better and emphasize the better in the end, that could be a chance for us.
Thank you very much,
As I
Hans.
said earlier, we should not talk Latin. We should talk to peasants in their language.
Thank you very much, Hans, for this very interesting start, and I think a very good start, and something to keep in mind. Your presentation when we go through the week. And the new reality as the current summer study is named, is labeled, that is already, I think, going in this direction. But again, we're talking amongst each other currently. There were more interesting questions in the chat. For example, Jackie raised the point that now, because we have these updates, these revisions coming from the Energy Efficiency Directive, or also the Building Directive this year, they're important points for us as scientists also to enter the discussion and to strongly shape the discussion here and bring in our evidence-based analysis, or our evidence-based knowledge, whatever that term. And it would be great, Hans, if you have a look at the chat in the Woover, and maybe you can answer some of the questions that were pointed out there. And then with that, we head to the next speaker, who is Anders. Welcome, Anders. We're looking forward for your presentation on flexible tariffs in the Danish electricity market, and also on what we can learn from this for the rest of Europe. We'll see. Maybe we can tackle this question in the Q&A. Anders will be presenting live, so maybe you can try whether it works out, sharing your screen and so on. I think we have a lot of backup plans anyway. Okay, that looks great. Then please go ahead.
Thank you, Heike. So My name is Anders Hansen, and today I will talk to you about dynamic electricity pricing and energy demand using the case of the Danish electricity market. So I hope this can lead to discussions on and with you and others also on the role of dynamic pricing in order to contribute to energy demand flexibility or energy demand reductions. So, and if we say that that dynamic pricing should have an important role, then we could discuss how to get households to adopt these products and accept them, and how to, in the end, also make them respond to these dynamic signals. So then finally, I would like to discuss also some of the underlying assumptions of behavior that might hide in the design of such products and energy policy and technologies and energy systems. So my presentation today is based on a paper, which is the part of the first work package of a project funded by Elforsk, which is part of the Danish Energy Agency, and which we do in collaboration with two Danish energy retail companies, CS NVE and Norlys Energy. And the overall aim of the project is to answer, do dynamic tariffs actually contribute to energy demand flexibility? And in other words, do they actually affect household practices in the way we expect them to do? But in order to do that, we start by outlining the conceptualization of energy efficiency, dynamic pricing, and energy demand, and also to describe how dynamic pricing entered the electricity market. But before I will talk more about that, I'd like to introduce myself. So 2 years ago, I attended eceee for the first time, and it was one of the best conferences I ever attended. So I think the combination of being isolated in a beautiful environment with great people, great food, and near the ocean, all of this is the perfect conditions for meeting across disciplines and to discuss new ideas and learn from other research fields. So we're still isolated, and the weather is pretty nice here in Denmark, at least, and we meet across disciplines still, but it's not quite the same, and the food is certainly not as good as good this year. But so I hope you see you all in France in 2 years again. But for now, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to present to you. So last time I also presented on energy consumption and behavior, and because of that, I also would like to just spend a little bit time of presenting the perspective that I've bring to this in this project and in this presentation. So this is my research group, and that's also because this is the perspective is something that we share in the research group, more or less at least, of course. And I miss one face, and that's my here, so I put myself in here. And you may recognize some of them. Kirsten Hansen is leading the group, the professor of the group, and like the perspective that we have is that we focus on what people actually do. We focus on household practices. So we tend to focus on what people do rather than what they are intending to do or what values they have and so on. And in that, we will focus on interaction between material arrangement, norms in society, and what they have carried with them themselves as previous experience and social relations. And then Gianluca, you just saw before, is the main co-author of this paper. So I would like to talk about this paper today and present the results of that. And it's written together with also two business partners from two Danish utilities. Yeah, so the aim of the paper was to outline existing knowledge on energy pricing and energy demand. And like most places, dynamic electricity pricing is as old as domestic electricity itself, of course, in different forms. At least it's like this in Denmark, but now motivated by increased demand for energy flexibility, then the balancing the daily fluctuations in demand and production becomes even more important. And one of the most important popular instruments is dynamic pricing. So this is related to visions of smart solutions, so smart grids, smart homes, and smart metering. And in Denmark specifically, it's enabled by a full rollout of smart meters to Danish households. So one of the baselines for this, or the conceptual baseline, we could say like that, is that although we talk about energy flexibility and also energy demand and maybe even energy efficiency, it there may be differences across different actors. So here I'm just referring to some work from colleagues, look at also how systems and groups can distribute electricity and maybe focus on flexibility as a quality of energy system. Retailers focus on marketing flexibility. Technology is focused on how the capacity of enabling flexible practices. And in the end, households, they need to realize some flexibility in their everyday rhythms and practices. So the other thing here is that in this paper, we try to argue for the shift from looking exclusively on the consumer to looking more of practices. So this entails different things. For example, that electricity is consumed for performance of everyday practices. This is not novel in that sense, but then also to focus on actually what is the material surroundings, social relations, and norms that is actually affecting these practices. And of course, the electricity consumer is still important because they have different competences, understandings, and engagement in the way they perform the practices. But most important for this part of for flexible demand is maybe that how the timing of the practices is related to or embedded in daily rhythms and societal rhythms. So, and these are structures that are difficult to change. And we need to know that also when we design these products, and at least then what we expect of these products. So we suggest that we zoom in on these specific doings and activities, but also look at zoom out and look at what is actually structuring these activities or the patterns of these activities. We focus on two specific types of dynamic pricing: time of use and real-time pricing. And I have to apologize for the graphic design here. I made it myself. Maybe you can see that, but. And we focus on these two because these are the ones that have been implemented in Denmark. And time of use is where you have a certain period during the day where prices are higher, and where real-time pricing has this is reflecting variation during the day in real time in wholesale market prices and so on. And there is a lot of literature actually suggesting that that households respond to dynamic pricing. Of course, these are very difficult to compare across countries and across data sets and all this stuff. And that's why we need also to do some studies in a specific context and look at them with specific. We just need more empirical evidence on the specific context. And to do a little bit of sales promotion here, also something I presented 2 years ago is that we looked at prosumers. So there was Danish PV households, and we saw that they were actually also they were willing to shift their consumption during the day or time shift their consumption. Of course, this group is a special group, and that's why we need to do research also on more representable groups or samples. And what was it they time shifted? It was here was suggested that there was the washing machine, tumble dryer, and dishwasher. And this is in line with also other studies showing similar things. Yes. So in Denmark we have this. We are known, I think, for our complex electricity bill. So actually, although this seemed simple, it took me a while to figure out, because some of these share, for example, the share of PSO element changes every quarter, and so there's a lot of different things that I mentioned in our electricity bill, and this is quite important when we look at what can actually be flexible. So in best cases, it is the supply tariffs and the distribution tariffs that can be flexible. So not that much actually. And yeah, so then I start by looking at the grid companies. And the grid companies, they face 3 challenges. I'll not go so much into these because some of you probably know about these, and I've mentioned. But again, the solutions may be interesting. At least the last one here, introducing time-varying tariffs. So some companies, some of the big companies, grid companies in Denmark have done that, and here is a table showing like rather high peak off-peak ratios for different companies, and they actually cover more than 80% of the Danish population, or estimated at least. And they all these are all time of use tariffs. But retailers instead have like suggested real-time pricing and only implemented that to, or almost all only implemented real-time pricing tariffs. So, and they waited a little bit to see how the grid companies did with their products, and then they implemented some of their products when we have this smart, full smart meter rollout. This is also because there's another demand from customers with increased number of EV and heat pumps on the in Danish households. But still only 10%, and this is only again an estimate because it's not that easy to actually figure out what is a dynamic product and what is not. And there's one of the problems here also. So, but only 10% of these products we have identified them as dynamic pricing products. And still there is a lot of confusion because they use a lot of different names for almost the same product. And some of these names are rather misleading because they refer to flex, variable, and so on, but maybe they are actually not. And I have some examples here. So now I translated into English, or at least the first headline here. So some of them link to spot prices, climate, flex, or actual cost, hourly pricing. So these can actually be quite different, at least I guess for a consumer, and be a little bit confusing. Yes. So conclusions and implications here. So just to summarize a little bit is that there are some things about we should look at the products. When we look at the future implementation of these and success of dynamic products, then we should look at, are the financial gains actually enough for household? Is the economic incentive? I know that economic incentive can't do it itself, but we have to look at also if this is actually strong enough, if it means that much. And then we have to look at the demand side also and see what is actually going on in the households, which type of households engage in this, and what households do not, and why. So a lot of problems here, but it's something we also want to look into. And then some of the recommendations we have made based on this review of products so far is that that would probably be a good idea to focus also more on how households actually consume electricity during the day. What are the rhythms that actually steer how people actually use electricity? And then broaden the target from flexible consumers to flexible practices. And then we just need to know more about how people actually doing this, and are they responding to these products. And then, of course, we have to look at some kind of common definition of energy flexibility or dynamic tariffs and different products. Maybe we need also more creativity in these products. Some of the research shows that we need some simple products that have a clear difference between peak and on-peak periods and so on. Maybe we should learn a bit from that, and there's certainly room for that, I think. So so that's it for me. Thank you for listening, and hope you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Anders. And just Exactly. With the next slide shift, I wanted to cut you off. So great that you're done. Perfect. I would just ask one question, and maybe you can try to answer it rather quickly, and maybe we have later time, or you can also answer it in the chat. And the question comes from Hans, and it goes a bit to what he presented earlier. In terms of for all these for all these things you have showed us, to which extent are actually people and consumers aware or sufficiently aware of the prices? How can they react? Like, what options do they actually have, right? So people that don't want to spend their day watching electricity prices, but how do we get the consumers on board and inform them?
Yeah, so that is actually a lot of questions in one, but maybe I can start with, now I framed this also as a presenting a perspective. So I think also from this perspective, it would be important to say, why are households not more engaged in, for example, when I talk to utilities or retailers, they say, yeah, but people don't want to engage in different in an electricity bill. Of course, it's really complex, and maybe it just works fine and all the stuff. So there are good reasons for all this. So I think we have to have much better understanding of what is actually going on in households. What are the household dynamics that makes households appear inactive or unengaged and all this stuff. But yeah, as I said, also refer to some of our research on the prosumers, we can see that this is a group that is very active. And what can we learn from that? Maybe we can learn something about how we have also hide, like in Denmark, for example, we have the electricity bill. It is paid like something, and the utilities, they acknowledge that they have made it very convenient for consumers to be electricity consumers. They really made it very convenient for them, and maybe this convenience actually made them inactive for good reason. And I think maybe we should try to go the other way around and say, yeah, but I don't know if that was a good answer, but maybe we can discuss that also later.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you very much, Anders. And Rachel also points out that the speakers are welcome to answer the questions on the Woover platform, right? If there are questions now after your talk, please feel free to go and answer it in writing. That will save us some time for, or at least allow us to engage in further discussions. Okay. Then with that, we are coming to the next presentation, which is also recorded. It's presented by Franz, and Franz is in his presentation talking about data center infrastructure and energy gentrification, which might of course be important, not only in terms of the data center infrastructure, but for the overall energy system. So we start with the film here.
Hi, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Franz Liebertsson, and I'm a doctoral student at the International Institute for Industrial and Environmental Economics at Lund University. Today, we'll be presenting a newly published paper called Data Center Infrastructure and Energy Gentrification. The paper is a collaboration between myself and my two colleagues, Julia Velkova and Jenny Palm. I'm going to start by showing you this picture. For those of you who do not recognize it, it's a very famous scene from the Star Wars movies in which the protagonist fight the antagonist in a lightsaber duel. And there are two reasons I'm showing you this. The first reason is that I'm a huge Star Wars fan and I like to use it as a pop culture reference. The second reason is that it introduces the two themes that I will be talking about today, namely how we envision the future and the notion of infinite energy supply. In the Star Wars universe, the characters press a button and the lightsaber pops up, or the spaceship jumps into light speed. Energy always appears to be there and abundant, and the characters never have to think of any scarcity. And to us, this notion of energy as an infinite resource appears to be somewhat present also in contemporary urban planning. And of course, this naive idea will eventually cause problems. But I will get to that in a minute. Now, let's leave space and return to Earth, to Sweden to be more precise. In the very south of Sweden lies the county of Scania. And here you see some headlines from Scanian newspapers warning about an electricity crisis. Southern Sweden is currently experiencing a so-called capacity deficit. The electricity grid lacks the capacity to deliver the electricity needed. This is a result from how the Swedish electricity grid is constructed. In the very north, most of the production is located, and in the south, you have most of the consumption. On a yearly basis, Sweden exports electricity to neighboring countries. Sweden has an electricity surplus, but domestically, Sweden has problems with the delivery. The north-south going transmission lines are not dimensioned to cater to the demand in the south. So there are a few bottlenecks along the way, and the grid has not the capacity to deliver the electricity needed. This has, of course, created problems for local companies. I'm going to share with you the four most prominent examples. These four companies are all located in Scania. Pågen is an industrial bakery. Polychemy is an industry that recycles plastics. Ecolean is a company that makes lightweight packaging solutions. And Lindab is a ventilation company. What they all had in common was that they all were planning to expand their businesses. But in order to do so, they needed more power. But when they requested more power, the distribution system operator declined their application and stated that it wasn't possible under the current conditions of the limited capacity. Meanwhile, there was another company, Microsoft, who were planning to build a data center also in Scania. And data centers by default consume large amounts of electricity, but this wasn't an issue when they filed their application. There was no mentioning of any capacity deficit or capacity limitation, and their application was approved. So how should we understand this development where a multinational company capitalizes on a local resource at the expense of local companies? In the paper, we propose energy gentrification to explain this development. And I will elaborate on it in just a bit, but before that, I will briefly explain traditional or conventional gentrification. So gentrification is a process in which an urban area is revitalized. And this causes the housing prices in the area to go up. The area will see an inflow of high-income residents who move in and are able to capitalize on the housing properties. The area will also see an outflow of low-income residents who cannot afford to live there anymore, and they have to move away. They are being gentrified. They are being pushed away from the area. So in essence, you could say that gentrification is a struggle over a resource between the acquirer who gains control over the resource and is able to capitalize on it, and the displacee who are being pushed away from the resource because of the changing ownership. So in the paper, we have used this analogy and applied it to the electricity grid, but we have switched out the characteristics. So instead, the struggle is over the energy supply between large size energy users who gain control over the energy supply at the expense of local energy users. And they have then to choose between either remaining and continuing their business under limited conditions, or move to another area where the energy supply is guaranteed. In the paper, we explain energy gentrification as energy gentrification may occur when new facilities are established and affect the energy supply in the region to the extent that the operations of existing users are significantly impeded or entirely liquidated. Now, I'd like to point out that no energy gentrification has yet occurred. The examples I shared with you before, these 4 companies were all eventually granted the power that they requested. But it wasn't until that they made a lot of noise in the media that the distribution system operator was able to create some makeshift solutions to cater to their need. But the situation is still dire, and several regions and counties in southern Sweden that are already hosting existing data centers have announced that they will not be able to accommodate another large size energy user. And here you see a headline as recent as last week. In the article, the transmission system operator is warning about the power deficit, or a possible power deficit, the coming winter. And according to its estimations, there will be a power deficit of 1,600 megawatts during peak hours. The solutions that aim to remedy this problem all rely on the idea that if the transmission lines going from north to south, the south would be able to use the surplus in the north. However, according to a recent report by the county of Norrbotten, that county is located in the very north of Sweden. According to this report, it is estimated that the future energy-intensive businesses in the area will consume most of the current load abundance. So this means that even though the transmission lines were expanded, there would be no surplus to transmit from north to south. And in addition to this problem, we can see some other quite worrying trends. We will see an increase in electrification of transports. We will see an increase in electrification of industry. The increased urbanization will put additional pressure on local grids. The digitalization of society will likely require a lot more electricity. And the new industry of data centers will also consume large amount of electricity. And to us, this calculation does not appear to add up. Where will all this electricity come from? Similar to the Star Wars universe, there appears to be this idea of energy and electricity as an infinite resource. But sustainable development starts with the recognition that resources are finite. And assuming that there is a limit to the electricity that we are able to use, which societal functions should we then prioritize when we reach this maximum? In the paper, we argue that there should be a dialogue. We as a society should have a dialogue around which functions we want in our society and which functions we want to prioritize in situations of limited capacity. We also argue that there should be a mechanism that safeguards and protects these functions in times of limited capacity. But what do you think? What do you think of energy gentrification? Do you think it's a useful tool for understanding this development and the negotiations that will arise around electricity supply? Or do you think there are other more apt theories or tools for understanding this kind of situation? And with that question, I would like to say thank you and open up the floor for a discussion.
So, Franz, thank you very much for the recording of this super interesting paper and the super interesting concept of energy gentrification. Yeah, we had some discussions in advance. So there were no questions so far, or are there questions coming in? So I mean the sorry, so a bit confusing to watch the chat at the same time. Yeah, I mean you have pointed out nicely in the case of Sweden with the Microsoft coming in with the data centers, which have of course yeah, huge energy demand currently, and which are still their yeah, their service is strongly needed, right, for a lot of further applications, as we all know. And these companies used to, like, say, buy themselves out with, for example, Microsoft is also, I think, already the data centers are already carbon neutral, but which means they are buying a lot of green electricity already and directly feeding into the problem that you brought up here, right? So I think Amazon Web Services, one of the largest energy or has the largest energy electricity wind power plants in the US. So they are already working on that. But I think it's a very important point that you make, that also renewable energy is not an endless source, right? Maybe you can say a bit more about this point. I think that's a very important point to make and to communicate, particularly in the dialogue with these major companies.
Yeah, I guess we have to rethink how we construct the system. As the energy system will see more shares of renewable and intermittent energy production, I think that we also need to like reconfigure how we plan and consume energy. Yeah, so sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, no, that's right. There are other points coming in. No, the question would be also how do we prioritize, like, the dialogue that you were talking about? I think it's a super super important question. What do we prioritize? but also quite a very complex question to answer, because we are using the services and goods provided by the industry. So one question that came in was on what you think are the most receptive actors to change their energy use, right? The industry, do they have a lot of, for example, through demand response possibilities to shift their loads, or will it be the end users that then have to reduce their demand? Could what we heard in the talk before, flexible tariffs, be a solution? What do you think about that? How to steer this complex process?
Yeah. So we approached the topic from a policy perspective, and so the reason that these data centers are establishing themselves in Sweden is that Sweden has very favorable conditions. So for example, Sweden has a stable fiber optic connection, low energy prices, a reliable or somewhat reliable energy production, and also a cool climate for cooling the servers. But yeah, so in the regards to energy supply, there is no real incentive for the large energy users to produce energy themselves. So we, in the paper, we say that there should be a law or a regulation mandating that these large size energy users are somewhat self-sufficient, because as of now there is no real incentive for them to produce their own electricity.
Thank you very much, Franz. And there are more questions in the chat, so maybe you can have a look after you talk and try to see whether you can answer some on the board, and we will have some minutes at the end also to go into some of the questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, then we will come to the last presentation, which is by Nielsen Silva Brito. And Nielsen is bringing us a different concept and a different idea again. So jumping a bit around in this session with a lot of interesting concepts to further look at. So he's looking at the role of citizens within the EU and how we can act collectively at community scale. And we will be starting with his presentation, with his recorded presentation. And then again, feel free to ask questions in the chat on the Woowa board.
Hello, my name is Nelson Brito. I'm the last presenter of this panel, and today I'm going to talk about a personal experience that might be useful for others. I will be talking about some identified problems, then I will make a brief pass through energy performance certificates because they have too much influence on what we may do. And then I will talk about a proposal that is stalled due to legislative barriers. I'm doing so to explain that we must find a way to accelerate things that eventually work well. And I will end proposing that eceee might have a specific role on this process. So, European citizens, enlightened or paying spectators. Well, we all know that the NZEP goal is viable in many buildings, but it's very expensive. Of course, we can reduce costs with scale. I've proven that. But everything is designed for individualism, and this is very troubling. And so there's only two spaces. Some people know what they are doing. All the other ones are paying for what it said it's best for them. In Annex 56, I've got a link to the PDF there. I have demonstrated that if you have a house which is classified as non-efficient by the energy performance certificates and spend some money on it, you will probably have the same letter and low maintenance. If you spend more money, you might reach high values, but you will spend so much on maintenance that it's not interesting. I also studied, made a deep investigation, and found out that if you use some brains and you really get to know what the house is really, not what the energy performance certificate says, You can spend some money and have very good results with some decent maintenance costs. I also found out that if you go for scale, the same amount of money can get you very interesting results. And then if you use brains also, you can have neighborhood scale results, which are very interesting. This is simple to explain using photovoltaic panels as a metaphor. When you buy a panel, they say it works something like this, 100%. But the moment you put it working, it goes down to 90%. And then if the orientation is not right, it goes down. And then if there's a little shadow, then you only have 10% of the production. So if you really look at it, solar panels and all renewables already have some troubles with transportation, etc., mostly on the end part where you could get a lot with scale. But then there are CTO permits, police permits, installation, etc. All that implies great risk to what we are doing. If you really look at it, I've got this issue in my building, I've got this issue in my street. So just imagine how many millions of useful hours are used in these useless processes. We have to decide if we are going to train every European citizen to make a good energy efficiency decision, or if we can really trust what the seller tells you, because the cost is too high on making repetitions. So we have to make sure that no one is left behind, in particular the big players on each neighborhood. Energy performance certificates are a great part of this problem, as you will. Energy performance certificates are an individual approach to a collective problem, and of course it will make no sense in the end. So if you have to make a certificate for one home and 50 certificates for 50 homes that are exactly the same, of course it will give lots and lots of useless work. And of course, if it's one solution fits all, the results are going to be the same. Most of all, the final results of the energy performance certificates are not even interesting. This comparison system of the energy performance certificates assumed so many simplifications that in practice it makes no sense. And in fact, it's like comparing oranges to apples. The dangerous part is that these EPCs evolved from a comparison tool to one financing instrument. So everything you can do is defined by the EPC you have. So if you have an orange or if you have an apple, you've got to do exactly the same thing and place external insulation on it. And this is not even fair because imagine the financing solutions we have now in Portugal are only for the very poor or the very rich. If you are rich, you can get up to 10,000. If you are poor, you can get 1,300. But from here, you've got to take 300 for the energy performance certificates, 300 for the VAT. And so I don't know what you can do with 700. But the rest of the population has absolutely no gains. Of course, they can say, oh, we've got a better letter. Does that correspond to a better result? And the thing is, it's not only economic, it also should be environmental. Are we importing insulation just to put it around apples? And cultural, do we want to see Europe wrapped around in insulation? Well, but in fact, I have studied in the PDF I've shown above that there are alternatives which are here, but this is the only way the law allows you to do. So in fact, we are limited. And so the results are not even, imagine what happened in the 20 years, no results. Of course, there's another problem, which is about innovation. You cannot have new oranges because they are predefined. So this house, which is a rotating house, can only get a B- in the Portuguese energy performance certificate. And so the same happens to old houses. I cannot do whatever I want because it's not framed in the certificates. Of course, it's explained that it's the rules Europe imposes, but real explanation is like we are issuing 10,000 certificates, 1,000 certificates per day. So it's a lot of money coming in, and so we don't want to change anything. Next, I'm going to show you a neighborhood scale proposal. Currently, people are not attracted to the city center because they think that these houses are not comfortable and they think they will pay very big bills of energy on keeping them warm. Many of the people that live in the city center already live in full poverty. That way, they are not able to invest in renewable energies or in rehabilitating their own houses. So the investigation demonstrated that it's possible to reach very good energy efficiency levels, but it also showed that it's very expensive to do it alone. And so that led to a solution. We had to find a collective way to do things in neighborhood scale so that the prices could be lowered and the investment could be attractive to a huge amount of persons. First, we must find the local community actors that can join the people into this common goal. Then we have to find a way to match that with the local policies and ongoing projects. Then we really have to study the best way to do it, and that's where science goes in. And finally, we need an investor, someone who will know that by participating in these kind of projects, they can help us achieve a goal which is important for Europe, but also they can get a payback of their investment. So we found a way to bring to this equation external actors. These are some of the steps of the presentation that started as a 2015 eceee summer study paper that received amazing input from the participants. And then I made this proposal for the Vinci, won the prize. Then I made a capitalist version for the eceee, which was very well received. Then I presented it somewhere else and to multiple city halls and investment funds. The thing is that it stalled. And why? It's not because of financing, not about technical complexity, but because of normal failures. There were street works needed, but there's no legislation that allows me. And so I'm also to blame. And as I always get Sala, I've got here, that you know where you want to go, but you rarely know how you're going to get there. So I was always trying to engage the municipality in it, but not enough people know what I'm talking about. And still, the directives in Portugal, it's a partial transposition, so I cannot share thermal energy. And so there are also some undisclosed monopolies, which can be seen because there's only one district heating solution in Portugal, which is really strange, though. So let's just forget about it and say, okay, imagine that this was great and everything was working. And so in the next year it was working, so it's operating for 1 year. So we organize some visits, past actions, we come and do some scientific tourism. Then we start in 10 other places. And the thing is that we will always have so many dropouts because the processes are not simple. Even if you go to contracting processes, most will be scared about the proposition. So after almost 10 years, 15 years after the initial proposal, I might have another one working. So the thing is, we have to find a critical way to make sure that if something works, then put it to action everywhere. And so I found these friends and foes, and it's about stories. We build up a story, and the story has some use because they help us to learn and survive. The link is here. You can check it out. And so I'm looking for our friends, which are the European 2050 goals, but at the same time for our foes. Our European 2030 goals are not in line with the other ones because they are based on linear circles. So they are telling us buy, not buy what you need, just buy what makes a better letter. And so we must find a way to take away these foes and bring them together into finding a new future. Are there solutions that are viable everywhere in Europe, like district heating, renewable energy building integration? Because in most facades, most municipalities consider it as a facade alteration. So you've got to do licensing, and sometimes you spend more on licensing than on the solutions and themselves. And is there a way for fast track, a quick way to do things, or is there a penalty for the municipalities and countries that don't let their citizens act on the best European interest? I know there are negative approaches, but a good solution would be a positive way. So I will need your help. And my idea is that we should decide if we have the right as EU citizens to act collectively. If so, if we should do it using a citizens' initiative, which is asking Europe about legislation, or using existing provisions, or continuing to write papers. I unfortunately don't think this last one is going to work. So, should community scale initiatives have EU-wide streamlined pathways? I believe so, because this would generate scale for the good solutions. I want someone who is used to doing district heating networks to have a big market and to do it all over Europe. And the biggest thing is, how can we do it? And is there a role for eceee? And this is my last slide. And I'm worried about who is eceee talking to? European politicians? Well, I've placed eceee here on the same level as the Joint Research Center, which is the Investigation Center of Europe. Don't know if this is the right place, but just check. If you have an idea, you talk there, and then it passes from year to year, then from year to year or to there. Then the energy agency reads it in another way. Then it goes through the energy performance certificates that say no, and then it goes to European citizens. But in fact, we would have a nice space to act, just looking at this crossroad, which is on each neighborhood, and on these connections that we could make with all the rest of the community. So I'll leave you my contacts. I'm really interested in making some of these things happen, even my other project or other projects. And so this is my declaration of interests, and I think everyone should have one, so that we are always aware of what is triggering our decisions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nelson, for the recording. Are you with us to answer some questions?
I am, but I have no video.
Okay, I think that's fine for now. I think we have no questions yet in the chat, but what James has hinted me to is the question of how easy or how difficult do you think it is really to have these community actions? I mean, it would involve, as you pointed out, you would have or you would need a lot of actors that are willing to invest at the same time. And how do we create such a community, or how is it possible to create such a community that people are really able to invest at the same time? Or wouldn't this then benefit majorly large players who are maybe able to buy a whole compound and invest there? Like, do you have any ideas of how this community scale
Can
could
you
work
hear
out?
me correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so I wasn't counting on that question, but I can give an example of when I presented on eceee. I had a contact from Palo Alto, and I didn't know that there are two Palo Altos. There is a rich Palo Alto, and there is a poor Palo Alto in the United States. And the rich Palo Alto doesn't want people in the not rich one, which is where the people who work, who do the services, cleaning and stuff live. They don't want them to be poor, energy poor, or anything like that. So it's in their best interest that they live well, so that there's social rest of that area. And I was contacted to make a way so that the rich ones would pay for energy heat pumps, electric heat pumps for domestic hot water, they all would all buy the same system, and by scale the price would reduce. The poorer ones would have it for free, but the richer ones would get back their investment just on the lowered costs by scale. And it's really interesting how such egoistic society, capitalist society, can sometimes find solutions to maintain well-being. And the price from Vinci, you saw a little bit of the video there, proves that there are lots of companies that have nothing to do to their money. They just want to find safe places to put their money in. Otherwise, they are paying to the bank. And so there's not lack of money, there's just lack of organization and too much detail, too much bureaucracy in the process. So if we find a way to streamline, for instance, a district heating around Europe, where you have contracts, where you have technical specifications, etc., 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 you have a real market for implementing this solution all over Europe. And I think it could be an interesting role for eceee because we have all the expertise, but I think we are talking to the wrong persons. We are talking to the top of EU, and when the things go down, it's like that telephone game. Do you know? I don't know how to tell it in English, but you whisper something to the ear of a person and it goes to the other one, and when it comes around, the message is completely different. A while ago, it was about building back better, and we don't even have to build back, we just have to upgrade better. As Nielsen said, we should emphasize the better, and I say we should emphasize, let's use better what we already have. Let's not build anything more that we don't need.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And there was also a question on the WUVR board for you. So I would start actually the round. We have now 8 more minutes left for the overall Q&A. So please, if you guys have more questions for the panelists, you can put them on the board. And yes, please, all the speakers, you can switch on your cameras, and maybe that encourages some more questions, and we can see each other when answering them. I would start, because we were just talking about that, with another question for Nelson, which is on the question of large multifamily buildings, and to which extent, for example, housing associations in large multiple family homes could solve the difficulties that you just mentioned, right? It would be basically within the same building, people that might be able to invest more or less. Have you studied that? Have you looked at that?
Yes.
And there were some suggestions.
There's absolutely no difficulty. Sorry. The only difficulty about that is the condominium part, because people don't like the condominium meetings are not something very attractive. And so people have got this very bad idea. So there's the need of an external external stakeholder player that will easen up the burden and works like a B2B player, business to business player, and then makes that last part interface as business to consumer. And it's really easy on multifamiliar buildings, because sometimes you're just spending space on very large heat pumps in your kitchen. And if you look at the price of your building, it's like 3,000 euros for the heat pump, and it's like 10,000 euros of lost space. And so it's really not interesting. And so multifamiliar, it's the easiest one, but I want this to happen in each neighborhood, okay?
Thank you very much, Nelson. Then I would say we go backwards now. We have 2 more questions for Franz. And the first one from Stefan Thomas was please, if you have already answered in the chat, let me know, but I don't see that now. So I've just picked out some questions from there. The question here on your concept of or electricity gentrification was whether it shouldn't be priority to resolve shortages ASAP, and particular with energy efficiency and sufficiency measures, with demand response coming in, and making full use of the energy efficiency first principle. Maybe you can say a bit about, how does it, how would your concept fit in those principles like energy efficiency first and so on that we see already in the EU scale, and how could you additionally contribute with this concept?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with this comment. I think that we should fix the capacity deficit first. I think what energy gentrification as a perspective can teach us is to, as I said before, to kind of reconfigure our idea of the energy supply, that we might that we have to rethink how we produce and consume energy, and hitherto we've become used to this idea that it's just there when we need it. But energy gentrification may teach us that we need to think differently of when and where we consume electricity, and yeah, and also, as I said, in times of scarcity, that we might also have to prioritize between different functions in society.
Thank you very much. And the second comment goes pretty much in the same direction what you already answered. I would say Joanne asked like whether we can link the conversation on prioritization with the discussions we're already having on fundamental needs within our dialogue on energy sufficiency. And I think that's pretty, if I understand correctly, pretty much what you had in mind also with applying this concept of gentrification, right?
Yeah.
To steer this dialogue. Yeah.
Definitely. It sounds like a great idea.
Thank you. Great. I would have one more question for Anders, and it's on the question of you mentioned in your presentation that you have about 20% of the actual energy demand could be applicable to the tariffs, right? So only with flexible tariffs we would reach only 20% of, for example, consumers. And the question here is whether you have an overall idea, how much we could save or how much it could help. Like here's the question on how many kilowatt hours we could save with this flexible tariffs, but more, maybe the question is also about how we could reduce peak loads, right? Which would reduce unnecessary infrastructure, for example, which might be even more crucial, the role of demand response rather than actual savings, but to reduce peak loads and the infrastructure and storage necessary for that. So do you have any sizes, any like idea how much can we reach? Or I could, for example, imagine that with things getting smarter, we might be able to have more demand shifts in the future, right? I mean, maybe a fridge that doesn't need power 24 hours, but can store some, or whatever. Maybe give us some thoughts on that. Would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So the short question is, the answer is no. I don't know how much it would could reduce peak load and so on, but I think that it will be much less than we actually would expect and what we would think it could be, because there is a lot of I guess with electrification of with heat pumps and space heating and electrical vehicles also coming to Denmark and a lot of other countries also, there will be a higher demand, but I'm not sure that I just don't think that we could actually reduce the energy use that much actually, but yeah, so that's the kind of the depressing answer at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, but you mentioned electric vehicles and heat pumps, for example, that could also be maybe an opportunity for getting people more interested in the whole thing, right? When you have really large scale electricity users in your household, you might think more about something like flexible tariffs rather than when you're talking about lighting or yeah, the fridge that is on 24/7 anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And I also believe more in automation when we talk space heating, for example. So I think there could be some things there, but still a lot of smart appliances, the smart stuff and all this, it still needs to have some kind of, it's still built on some expectations of comfort or convenience and so on, which is may just be increase these expectations in the future. So I'm not sure that we actually gain that much by doing that. But for example, space heating could be, I think, yeah.
Okay, great. Nelson, I've seen your hand raised, but Rachel is about to cut us off. So I'm very sorry for that, but I think we also need a break before the next session. Thank you very much for the panelists for super interesting papers and for your contributions. And I think it worked out very well with the technicalities. Please feel free to ask questions still and get in dialogue with all the panelists. Thank you very much. And panel 2 continues at 2:30.